roll call before we start our agenda today. So welcome, happy August. Hard to believe we're already in the second part of summer. So, all right, so with that, let's do the roll call. Who do we have from Multnomah?
Emily's here.
Welcome.
He's here.
Welcome. How about Washington?
Evan's here.
Welcome. Northwest.
Hi, Dorothy's here.
Welcome. Clackamas, I'm not sure if they're on yet. Clackamas.
Annette's here.
Yay, welcome. Lynn Benton Lincoln.
Christy's here.
Welcome. Lane.
Hi, Bess is here.
Welcome. Marion Polk. Don't see her yet. We'll come back. Yamhill. Jen's here. Jen. South Coast, I'm not sure that they're on their governance council today. South Coast, are you here? No. South Central.
Hi, Jillian's here.
Welcome. Southern.
Hi, Renee's here.
Welcome. Central.
Hey, this is Brenda.
Welcome. Frontier.
Todd and Patty are here.
Welcome. Eastern Oregon.
Kelly Poe's here.
Welcome. Blue Mountain.
Aaron's here.
Amy's here.
Welcome. Welcome. And Four Rivers.
Hi, Krista's here. Hello.
Krista is here. And let's see here. I know I hear somebody just come on the other phone line. I'll deal with that in 1 second. So let's see, for staff, with us today we have Anne.
Hi.
Margie.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Dana.
Good afternoon, everybody.
Sarah.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. Miriam. Oh, it's so good to see you, Miriam. Great. Welcome. Let's see. Anybody else from, we have, well, I don't want to forget, you're not staff, but Sue Miller.
Hi.
Welcome.
And you
Thank
got
you.
me.
And Elizabeth. Yes. Welcome, Elizabeth. Anybody
Cass.
else that we
Cass
did
is
not
here.
get something? Oh, Cass, there you are. I don't know. I didn't see you. Anyone else?
And this is Dawn Barberis.
Yes, Dawn, welcome. Sorry, it's hard to look at this Brady Bunch thing and get everybody. I apologize. Thank you. Anyone else that we have not called on yet? All right. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sarah and Miriam. I'm going to put myself on mute for a second, and we'll go ahead and get started with the top of our agenda. Welcome.
Hi, everyone. Good to see some of you and hear all of you. Hope that your August, I guess, is starting off with a bang. I will note I have allergies, so people seem to be concerned about, sickness these days. So just so you know, don't worry about me. It's just a fun grass pollen. So I really wanted to start us off with a budget update. That it will be very quick, but leave as much time as we can to kind of hear from you all, answer any questions you have. Miriam is here as well, so I'll just kind of take the first update part. Miriam will add in anything that you'd like, Miriam, and then we'll just see what questions you have, I think both on the budget, and we kind of wanted to dig in to budget-related issues to get your sense of some things going on in your community. So the reason I say the budget update is relatively quick. It's probably nothing new from the last time you may have seen the budget. There really hasn't been movement, what the co-chairs framework is really the latest information and what folks are still working off of. I will say we haven't yet had our role clarified for special session. If any, we haven't been invited to give testimony. So it's unclear if that will be the case this special session. I think, as you probably all know, they are poised to go in, so I think next week. I feel like I'm never quite certain if the date is moved, and do things relatively quickly. So the one kind of update is we will be proposing some alternatives, I think, to the budget cuts proposed in the framework, and we'll be doing that to the governor's office. I think, as in the grand scheme of things, I know that for you all and for the budget cuts may not seem this way, but this is just some context, I think, for the big picture. We know that the early learning division is, as far as the co-chairs framework goes, is very small cuts in relation to kind of the overall budget cuts. So I only say that to say that, of course, informs our ability to kind of ask to not be cut in certain ways, or to swap. So it's something you already know, I think. We'll definitely keep you updated as any movement goes forward at all on our side. And I want you all to know, I know that some of you represent hubs or represented on the coalition. I think that the Early Childhood Coalition is your best continued engagement forward during this time, and is what is most impactful at this moment. I think they're the folks who have the best chance and voice in the big legislature picture during the special session, and with folks. So Miriam, I would just pause and see if you wanted to add anything on the budget side before we move off of it.
Miriam, we're having a hard time hearing you. No.
I think I saw the word call in, so
yeah,
we'll wait there for a second. I guess we'll wait. Any questions that you all have had related to the budget itself and kind of process? Feel free to put them in the chat or unmute yourself.
Yep, I'll check here. Nothing in the chat yet.
This is Sue. Jillian, on the call yesterday, the ECC call, you raised some questions about the budget. Will you restate those so Miriam or Sarah could respond?
Yes, we were asked about the budget cuts and to clarify that there are budget cuts in the general fund budget from the biennium of 2019 to 2021. And, there were questions like, is it student success or is it the current budget? And, we have heard in different conversations that it's different grant streams, and we're hoping for some clarification as to what the thoughts are. And then during the legislative session of Ways and Means, the budget chairs on education mentioned that they had come up with these budget cuts based on conversations with department heads. And so just hoping for some clarification on where we are with what grant streams with the current budget for the general funds. Does that help, Sue?
If it helps Sarah and Miriam answer the question, it helps. Thank you, Jillian.
Yeah, so I think to start with kind of the last question, Jillian, to the point that I think probably Ed sub of Ways and Means made, I would amend that to say they use the first allocation cut that you all saw, the sort of priority list. If I'm going off of what's in the cut, that's what was used to determine cuts, at least to some extent. I'm not totally, I guess I would represent all of the allocation cuts that we put forward as being exactly what was put into the budget framework for being cut. But yes, I think that was their sort of source document when looking at agency cuts. But I think what Michael just put in the chat going forward, the KPI was not part of the list we received from the legislature, so I wouldn't, that's why I kind of say I don't think it's a one-to-one. I think we could, I can definitely share in sort of a chart form what cuts were being put forward with you all. I don't know if that would be helpful, but we can send that out. So that is what that is. They are all cuts to general funds for this current biennium. So it's not cut to the corporate activities tax, other funds. That's not this exercise we were talking about. That was not sort of, we did not really receive much of a cut in the co-chairs framework budget to the early learning account. The tri-chairs of Ways and Means proposed basically almost fully funding the early learning account in SSA with the CAP funds.
Hey, I'm back. Is this better? Can people hear me now? Okay, great. Sorry about that. So I think I heard kind of most of your question, comment, Jillian, and I'll try to, maybe I'll repeat some of what Sarah just said, but try to say it like a different way. I think that there's two things happening right now as we think about this special session on the 10th. One is the early learning with respect to the Student Success Act and the early learning account investments. The governor and the legislature reached an agreement that allowed, ELD to move forward with $139.5 million of the Student Success early learning account investments. For the second year biennium, our legislatively approved budget had us at 170, roughly 171 million in early learning account investments. So most of those are going out for all of the different, those dollars go out to communities and partners to, for the different programs that were budgeted originally in the early learning account last session. So some of that is also for infrastructure, I think, as everybody knows. So there's some monies for, the early learning division, for early learning hubs, coaching, and some like professional learning investments that were also associated with this expansion. So what I think is still, to Sarah's point, kind of what is still in the mix is potentially getting to the full amount of 170 million in the early learning account, which would allow the early learning division to move forward in funding all of the tier 2 applications. As we looked at all of the different grant reward processes, tier 1 all totaled up to 139.5 million. Tier 2 is if we get additional funding, which it looks like a good possibility right now, we would be able to move forward with those. And some of the infrastructure pieces, including funding for hubs and coordinated enrollment, are also connected in that delta between 139.5 million and 170 million. So as well as additional dollars for professional learning, startup, et cetera. Sarah knows the details better than I do around, I can't remember these days, but and then brain is overloaded on sort of what the breakdown is and what is in those pots of funds, but we can definitely clarify that. And then the GF cuts that Sarah talked about that were proposed by the legislature used, remember when we communicated about those allotment cut exercises back in, earlier in the summer and spring, they utilized those and they have really been trying to find, GF savings where they can. And so those are also, a part and up for discussion and session. I think some of the challenging parts that we've seen is something is being proposed to be cut in GF, say like Healthy Families Oregon, but it is also proposed to be increased out of the early, Student Success Act early learning account, right? So that is, I think something to sort of keep in mind. And both hub that, when I think about the two programs, the two investments that we have where that is happening, it's for early learning hubs and it's for Healthy Families Oregon. Is it anything else, Sarah? Indirectly, that focused childcare networks is somewhat like that way too, but for a different reason. That is proposed as a cut. But given the federal funds that we are receiving, including federal funds that we received in FY20, any cut to focused childcare networks would be counted as supplantation. So, that is that's something that we are still trying to work out kind of with the legislature. But I think those are the two programs. I don't know if that helped clarify things or if it was more confusing. Or maybe it was stuff you already knew. So.
I think we had the discussion, this is Jillian again, yesterday at Children's Institute Coalition, and what Sue is referring to is, I believe it's the 1.3 million that has the specific funds in that particular thing. I think it's stable attached families and student success. And so I think it was just trying to clarify, what does that mean and what does that look like? And so is that what you're talking about, that those funds will be there in student success and not in the general fund? Or what is the makeup of those funds? Will they be gone, and so will there be cuts to local hubs, or will they be put in place from somewhere else?
Yeah, I think that's some of what, that's exactly what I think, what I was trying to describe. So there's a $1.3 million general fund reduction for hubs out of GF, but there is more money, including and new and additional dollars for hubs in the Student Success Act early learning account under infrastructure.
Do we know as hubs what that amount is and what it's for the infrastructure in the new student success dollars?
Sure. Sarah or Denise, do you want to clarify that?
Yes, coordinated enrollment funding. So I think even though Miriam talked about there could be money in SSA for something and there could be a GF cut, I think her point in saying that was the SSA funds are not for the same purpose as the GF. So for HFO was to expand 500 slots. Of course, that's an interesting proposition when you cut existing general funds for HFO. It's not really, it's sort of we're trying to work out of how you, when there's legislative intent behind the language there, for example, that is really for a specific purpose. Can we, or how do we adapt that funding?
Yeah, and Jillian, just to clarify, So the 1.3 million cut, if there's a general fund cut, in the past we have taken any cuts to the funding streams that hubs usually externally subcontract out, like stable attached families and school readiness, rather than taking the cut to hub coordination, which is your most flexible funds and which could be used to backfill those funds if there was a cut there, whereas that backfill couldn't go the other direction, right? So that was why my recommendation, the staff recommendation to leadership was, if we do have to take that cut, that we take those in those funds that you subcontract with. So that's where that is coming from, right? So that piece is about, now that, so we work out the cut's going to be and where it's going to come from, none of that is determined yet. But that was my recommendation, that we take it in those two funding streams.
And Michael has a question in there, and I think what he's trying to figure out is, because of the KPI exercises, where does KPI sit right now?
Yeah, I saw that. Thanks, Jillian. Thanks, Michael. Right now, KPI was not, was not included in the framework for a proposed reduction, but it was part of the, our responses to the budget exercise. So I think that is something, that, as of right now isn't a, isn't proposed to be reduced at this time. If that changes, we will let you know for sure, and definitely communicate that if we hear anything. I also want to say that the ability, I guess I also just want to speak to your, what Denise just mentioned and her work to connect with you all and get your feedback into these cuts to be able to make a recommendation. I think where we are at the early learning division right now is that we want to be able to understand how we would implement this reduction in each program, and be able to share that information with stakeholders and advocates, and really make sure that people are in a position to, talk that in, really as aligned with the early learning division about what this cut would mean in terms of impacts to services and communities. We are not in a position right now as an agency to be able to directly advocate ourselves around, this cut shouldn't happen. And so the role that we can play right now is like really one of informational, not any kind of leadership role in taking any kind of leadership role and saying these cuts shouldn't happen. We really have to take kind of a backseat role. That does not at all mean that we're thrilled about these cuts. I mean, I think as Sarah pointed out, in the grand scheme of things, there is a lot of support. I know, to be able to protect the early learning investments, both in, our current investments in general fund as well as the Student Success Act investments, but we are obviously not, being entirely held harmless from sort of either pot of funds. So think of us that way. We want to be in conversations with you so that we can be clear in the work Denise is doing, is to understand what would the reduction look like actually, at a reduction at 1.4 million, so that you all are able to talk and share with others, advocates, or the advocacy that you engage in yourself, to say, this is what it would look like in my community, if I have to implement this kind of reduction, and we can just be in sync about like how we would actually execute that. So again, please don't think that the early learning division is, we're supportive of these cuts, we're excited, we just can't be the lead right now, but we want to be partners, and we're here to answer your questions, to continue to share information, and certainly you all, depending on where your own individual organizations are around your own advocacy, and what you are allowed to do and feel comfortable doing, I hope you will, if it's allowable, be able to educate your representatives in the legislature about, what will be lost with the 1.4 million cuts, or really all of the cuts that, are proposed in general funds, as well as the importance of, at this time, based on what you've been seeing in your communities, especially, related to COVID and other impacts, why it's important to continue to invest and prioritize early learning. I hope that, I had heard as well that there was some confusion about whether hubs could advocate, and I just want you to know that from the perspective of the early learning division, that, that is something that we know many of you do, and we expect that you do, and, we in no way are trying to restrict any of your efforts to, educate and inform your legislators about the importance of early learning investments.
Miriam, this is Molly.
Miriam,
That's really good to
Molly.
hear. I appreciate that we're allowed to advocate. That's super helpful. We definitely, as a statewide hub system, want to advocate in line with what the early learning division is doing. So one of the things that we've noticed in our partnership with the coalition is that they think in program language, right? They think healthy families, they think relief nurseries, and that's one of the things that's been super challenging this short session or this special session has been to try to encapsulate what would be lost by these cuts. So we were excited when Denise asked around, like, what are the impacts? And perhaps in future situations, we'll be able to, we're just trying to figure out how to get ourselves organized so that we really can be effective advocates, not just for our own communities, but for this whole statewide system. So that's kind of where we are, and just fumbling our way forward.
Yeah, and I think it's hard because during regular session or a short session or full session, this is the ask of the division that's supported by the governor, and we try to be in sync as possible. I know last session was my first full session, and we had like great alignment, and it was so great because we could propose some really exciting big new investments. I think what's different, just to try to emphasize this point again, is that we were asked to provide to do allotment reduction exercises, and so and now those some of those have been adopted, not all of them, in response, and so and we're not able to, kind of have an app that says, don't, you can't move forward with those, right? So this is where we're trying to figure out how to be, a support, and also, we want input and recommendations around, the smartest, the least disruptive way to do this if we are indeed forced to, execute action. I talked about Healthy Families Oregon. We were pretty far along in the process of awarding that expansion, those additional 500 slots. And it's not every Healthy Families Oregon program, and Move Forward programs have to expansion somewhat, because there's funding and kind of a cut on GF, but there's an expansion in FSA. And so, I know Elizabeth's on having that kind of dialogue with programs about what, if we have to do this, how do you want that to look, is sort of what Elizabeth's doing. And I think what Denise has been trying to engage all of you on is sort of, we have to execute this, what does that look like? That's very different conversation. And when we get asked, we want to be able to share that, not just with all of you, but with advocates or other legislators. But in this, again, to say in this situation, it's really going to be all of you and the advocates leading, during special session about what this would mean in your communities.
So Miriam and Sarah, there's just a couple of comments in the chat box that I'll just read off for you. So one is regarding KPI. If KPI does get cut or eliminated, will the ELD advocate for keeping funding for the July through September period, since funding has been allocated to subcontracts? So the idea being concerned that if there is a cut to the program year, to the fiscal year, that many of, for the first quarter, these dollars have been spent.
Mm-hmm. I would certainly say that I'm trying to think of another situation where this has come up. I think it was some of the general fund dollars actually for community planning that were part of the startup and that were in the ELD's budget that were money that we distributed to hubs, and then there was a proposed cut to that GF, and I think there still might be. And Sarah, I'm sure you probably want to jump in here too, but my always position is we're not going to take back money that we've already that we've already distributed has been spent. So I think that's where we kind of get into the situation of there have been dollars, they've been, sent, services have been provided, that's not, those are not resources that we can take back. I think the question is, what's key to your question is, I have not heard KPI is going to be eliminated. If, KPI sees some kind of reduction, that would be, kind of in the future and sort of future quarters, but, not, and we would, I'm sure at that point, have to work with the legislature and LFO to say, if KPI was completely eliminated, what that actually looks like in the context of an actual budget savings. But I don't even want to think about that right now, because I haven't heard that KPI is going to be eliminated. I think that I will just say, and I'm not going to say anything probably that you all don't know, it's going to be a really tough session next year. And I think that some of even what I hear right now is some of the concern about even moving forward with these investments in the SSA or minimal cuts to GF, existing programs in the general fund investment, is that we're just making our, cliff that much taller when, next session. So if that metaphor even made sense. But, I definitely talk with legislators who are like, well, how do we preserve this? And, sort of there's a mentality of cut a little bit more now because you're, it's going to be, pretty difficult to keep what everything that is funded now as we think into the next couple of years. So I think there was certainly more hope with where we were with the virus and how well controlled it was kind of in the middle of the summer, that there would be less of lessen the impact on the state revenue. But certainly, the last month has been really difficult. The virus is not well controlled right now. So we know that the impacts on our revenue are going to probably continue. So anyway, I think that's just wanted to mention that kind of thinking too, because that's one question I'm getting asked from legislators. The other is, if we give you all of this money, I think this relates to KPI, some of your resources, the SSA expansions. If you have these resources, will you be able to offer them this year? Is it possible? What do services look like? And, can you really serve families because of the pandemic? And so, the way I've been answering that is to really talk about how innovative and creative we are with, different ways of reaching families and supporting them. And, service delivery models may look different, but, families with young children, especially as all these resources are targeted, are, you know, needed more than ever right now. But the way we serve and reach families just looks different.
So Miriam and Sarah, I think there's just a couple more questions. One is regarding do these cuts and things become more clear and definitive after the special session? In other words, will all be decided regarding the budget cuts or reductions, or will there still be decisions that need to be made after that session? And Michael, if I missed that or said that wrong, feel free to jump on here.
Yeah, so really the purpose of the special session is to do the budget given COVID. So yes, there will be our final budget, I guess, going forward from that point on for this biennium will be determined. I would say, depending on what happens, there may be some, to your point earlier, Denise, some of the hub line items, for example, or other kinds of things that aren't actually spelled out in the budget. The implementation of the cuts will not, you know, necessarily be decided. So, but we hope that's why we're sort of trying to be one step ahead, given our really lack of a role in advocating and trying to figure out if these do come to fruition, what is the direction we'll give, so there is very little delay between the two.
Thank you, Sarah. And then I think here's a follow-up question. Is the timing of receiving coordinated enrollment contracts contingent on the special session? So I know we have contracts that are coming out right now for PDG that's not affected by that, but those additional SSA dollars, I think the question is in regard to those SSA dollars for coordinated enrollment.
Yeah, right now there's no proposed cuts to that line item. So what I would say is yes and no. I think the impact of whether we 100% know those funds exist and are allocated in our budget do rely on the special session. An ability to move forward does not rely on the special session, because I think, as you probably know, in those grants, there's language, and we do have federal funds through the preschool development grant that could be expended first for any expenditures prior to that money. I don't have any reason to believe there will be cuts. Not particularly, I don't mean to, I guess I don't want to like accidentally communicate any concern about it, but just to say that the guarantee that they are there in our budget is not until after session. But we'd of course amend anything really quickly and let you know if our optimism about that changes in any way.
Gotcha. And then I think there's just one more regarding the preschool promise slots. Does the ELD know at this point if the slots allocated on the tier 1 of preschool promise are going to remain the same, or is there any possibility of those being reduced? And if they are reduced, would you still move on to tier 2?
So let me see. Begonia, I think I have the answer for your question, but please let me know if there's additional information you're looking for. So we are still moving forward with the folks who received an intent to award. There is an appeals process that the council will go through as far as all of those. So I say any of that is contingent upon any of the appeals being approved. I can't think of language right now, but that might change things. So tier 1 as is, we still anticipate. Again, I'm only saying these sort of things like anticipate because until our budget is passed, it's not totally final. But yes, and we are hoping, but Miriam's point around the conversation she's had with legislators, so this is relative to tier 2. If we receive funding, we will fund down tier 2 in each hub region. So I guess I won't even say anything beyond that if we receive additional funding for Preschool Promise, we'll continue to fund down the tier 2 slots based on the original slot allocation plan?
Yeah, I would just say that so far what what I hear is that there's agreement on the 139.5 million, which allows us to fund tier 1. The only reduction, to Sarah's point, would be if the council considered and made a different decision through the appeals process that would affect somebody's grant. But in general, I'm not as worried about for right now this special session for the funding that is supporting tier 1. And I think there's conversations around, providing additional funding to be able to support the tier 2. We're not in a position to advocate for those either. So we just provide information, and some of the questions, as I said earlier, that we're getting are, should we, can these services actually be delivered given the pandemic, and especially with what we know about schools, not opening and providing in-person instruction, 1, and then 2, this critical concern I mentioned before of, what if, these resources and these investments can't be sustained in the longer term.
So I think there's just one more question from Krista about
Denise.
Yes, go ahead.
Sue, before we move to Krista's very insightful question. So Miriam and Sarah, one thing that I've been hearing, and Miriam, you kind of touched on it right now, is that because of COVID and because of the uncertainty about schools opening or schools not opening and all of that, I've heard real questions about, so are preschool promise programs really going to be able to use all of the slots that they asked for? And what's going to be the process for working with them or helping them figure out, if they can't use 20, can they use 10? And it's such a moving target because we don't know group sizes yet either, obviously. So I'm not telling you anything new. But I think some of what I've been hearing just in the system is how and when is that going to be figured out? So whether we stop at tier 2, regardless of the SSA increased funding.
So this is Begonia. Before Miriam answers, thank you for rephrasing my question. That was my question.
Okay, sorry. I misunderstood the question. I will say that it's a very good question. It's a hard question. It's just being honest. I'll give you, these are things that we're working through right now internally in terms of different service delivery options. I think it would be great to kind of have a longer conversation at some point soon about this. Woke up thinking yesterday morning about how we may be able to do our own version of pods for families that need it. With some of our state preschool dollars. I also, so that's sort of, no kidding, not even really kidding. But I think that what I said earlier about flexibility, creativity in terms of service models is going to be really important. There's a lot of unknowns, and I think we would anticipate some of our preschool promise providers will feel comfortable continuing to provide services if there's lower enrollment because of group sizes. I think we maybe need to think about hybrid models or other ways to support them to be able to provide support. Maybe for some of our home-based providers, maybe access to different facilities. I think we have to just think in terms of like what we know is the normal service delivery model, maybe a hybrid, some virtual and kind of in-person. What I don't think, because there's so many unknowns, that would be wise right now is to say that we're not going to, like, that we can, just thinking about this from this perspective, is kind of keep pivoting back and forth, right? I mean, we have to execute grant agreements. We have to, now I really worry, we know that some of the biggest costs that our providers have is their staffing costs. You know, they need these resources still to be able to keep their staff and connected. And so, you know, and you know, I know Donna, I saw Donna earlier. I think this is same with Head Start. Head Start may not be providing center-based services or in-person services right now, but they are providing and meeting a lot of needs that families have right now. And they need to be able to keep their staff, because when it is safe to open, or when it is safe to resume more normal operations in parts of the state, you know, the workforce detaching is a concern, not to mention the fact that, you know, we should support people who work in our, in this sector, you know, to be able to have other flexible ways of working. So sorry for that. We're having those conversations. I would right now, but I would just come back to the fact that it's going to take, it's going to take creativity. We're going to need to be flexible with service delivery models. We're going to have to continue to support programs and providers if we want them to be able to open when we're through this, right? They need to be able to be supported during the pandemic, and we need to be, you know, connecting more with families along the way to see if what we're proposing, you know, it's going to meet their needs.
Yeah, and I appreciate those comments, Miriam. And I guess one thing I would ask of the hub directors is that you participate in that creativity, because you know the communities in your regions. And Kelly, some of the comments you made on that call yesterday are really what triggered me, just remembering that we really do have a lot of expertise out in the field through you all that could feed into, you know, what are alternatives that you all are talking about or thinking about with your local partners that might be informative for the ELD. So it's really a two-way communication piece. So I would just really implore the hub directors to be a part of figuring this very complex, constantly moving situation out. Don't just figure the division's going to do it, because you are on the ground.
Okay. I think just one last question to Miriam and Sarah, and then we need to get on our agenda to coordinate enrollment, because we have lots to share there. And that would be any priorities that the two of you see for hub directors to focus on in the coming weeks. What would you focus on if you were a hub director?
Such a great question. That's great. Can I think about that one for a bit, because I think that's a really great strategic question, and I think we started to go there maybe with some of the I think flexibility with kind of some of the service delivery models. I think it's going to be a really interesting and kind of intense couple of weeks as we hear more about what schools are going to do in terms of their choices and you know, and what that means for families, especially our families who have continued to work and you know, I don't know. I mean, it's a great question. I'll let Sarah think about it, but I promise that I will reflect on that and definitely get back to all of you.
Thanks, Miriam. I didn't mean to stump you. I'm sure you have a gazillion other things on your brain. So if there was an easy answer, that's fine. But do you. I don't want to make it hard. I just was thinking about,
Yeah, I mean, I really want to think about it from this, just all of the kind of startup, I mean, and expansion that we have, and you know, we, you know, just what, to Sue's comment, I mean, what does that really, you know, the context is so different in so many different communities around the state, as the virus is, and so what would be a really great partnership, and where does ELD really need additional kind of support is one place that I could go, and then as well as I'm sure you're thinking about what does your community context look like, and you know, what are you seeing as the needs, you know, and I would love to hear from all of you about, you know, just a conversation about where you are focusing and where you're seeing the greatest needs.
Well, I would.
Final question.
Can I answer your question, Krista? I would say in the next 5 days, your focus should be on advocacy. You know, you've got the green light from the earlier conversation a little while ago. So I would say if it's not you personally, I'm sure people on your governance councils know legislators. This is the time to be energizing them. They should know what the impact of those cuts would be on your individual hubs. They will be the most effective people to call their legislative friends and say, you can't do that to us. We're just building a system and you can't do it to us. And Molly, I appreciate your earlier comment about you all want to ultimately be in line with the ELD and advocating for the system as a whole. And totally that's where we need to head. But I believe right now, between now and Monday and the special session, that's your call to arms. You know, let's see what can happen out in the regions to get these legislators to prioritize early learning. So that would be my answer to your question, Krista.
Thank you, Sue. So just one final question, which is how would be the best way to share what hub directors are hearing or creative thinking ideas that are coming out of their local conversations around Preschool Promise? How can, where should that information come to and live?
I think that's a great question. And yeah, I was going to say, I think there's, you know, Dana, we'll talk to Gwen and Dana and see what kind of regular form and avenues to share those, because I think those are really important and very appreciated.
Thanks for that comment in the chat.
This is Dana, just to go ahead and add a little bit. You know, we'll be talking to Angela. She's going to be doing some of the stakeholder engagement. So we'll be, you know, I'll be passing on the message about your energy and excitement to go ahead and share some of what you're hearing out at the ground level too. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, great conversation, Miriam and Sarah. And of course, Sue, thank you so much for your time today with the directors. It kind of takes up our open forum too, so it worked out really quite perfectly. So thanks so much for that. And then with that, we'll bid you adieu till next time and move over with Ann to talking about the coordinate enrollment, eligibility, and other things that we've learned in the last couple of weeks. So thanks again.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks. I'm going to share my screen here quickly. As this conversation was unfolding, I was thinking, man, I would have done these in a different order had I known, but you know, here we are. So I'm going to endeavor to go through the order I had and hope that you all will see the connections and the sparks that I was seeing as we went around. And I'll say, as I'm in presenter mode, I'm not able to see chats or really too many faces. So I'll ask you all to either interject or to ask maybe Denise if you can keep me updated on the chat box. I really appreciate that.
Yep, no problem.
Awesome. All right. So through this, I'm endeavoring to use sort of as many of the same graphics as possible. So this should be somewhat familiar to you all, thinking about our broad timeline of preschool promise enrollment. So as a reminder, really thinking about the commitment to continuity, and then enrollments based on the vacancies that remain after honoring the commitments to continuity. That, I think, is why we really started with eligibility determination training. And Dawn Barberis, who's joining us, has really taken on such a large part of these trainings. We are a week and a half, or I guess a week into the trainings. We have about 4 sessions remaining, and it's just been really great to see you all there, and then also to see the staff that'll be learning about, if not actually conducting some of these eligibility determinations moving onward. So I wanted to just briefly show you all what we've seen from some feedback around surveys on the training itself. So of the 27 folks who have completed our survey about training so far, most felt at least somewhat prepared. Everyone felt on the neither prepared nor unprepared to very prepared spectrum. So we had no one say they feel somewhat unprepared or unprepared to determine eligibility. You know, I think that's a good first step, but we did ask some additional questions just to see, are there things that could make training more effective, this training more effective, and then any other supports to determine eligibility, and then knowing that a manual was released as a part of the training invitation, to see, you know, what other areas there's further discussion on. And from that, you know, I think, you know, not surprisingly, and I think we're trying to make sure to support that pretty much, you know, every question under the sun, someone would like some training about it. And I think particularly on some of those big buckets of work, we're looking into how to best get more supports, clarify, and really be responsive to what we're hearing as needs around preparation for coordinated enrollment. So I'm going through those responses, and between those questions coming up during the trainings, and then any follow-up questions that anyone has sent me, trying to compile those on and make sure that we address those through a Q&A document, through kind of thinking through additional trainings or conversations to have, and also making sure any questions, I think particularly related to service delivery, some of the areas that Miriam was talking about, making sure that that's aligned with any communications coming from Dana and program team that would, you know, serve multiple audiences. I think providers and hub staff, or those doing coordinated enrollment, might benefit from. One of the areas that I wanted to make sure we talked about today, we heard from many that while there are, you know, those that will be what we've called kind of converting into preschool promise, there are many providers in your regions for whom these will be new classrooms, and so some questions around sort of how does the recruitment, outreach, and really the preschool screening forum come into play for some of this stuff. So I wanted to kind of provide a little bit of a introduction to some process around enrollment, as well as talk a little bit about the forms coming out today. Sorry, not coming out today. I want to talk about it today. So busy slide, but the green process is in the enrollment manual that came out. That's kind of our, you know, how the process of kind of continuing enrollment, you know, is expected to play out. And so much of the training has kind of focused on these kind of steps along the way. So you'll see the family sort of submitting their interest in a screening form, ranking up to 3 providers or sites that would work for them. Then moving into, being in an applicant pool, using that information about which providers they've ranked and which have vacancies to select families through the selection priorities and then the random lottery number. And then only for those families that have been selected to determine eligibility and sort of complete the enrollment or the placement process for them. So that involves the preschool screening form as kind of a first one. And then the eligibility determination and sort of final enrollment documentation lives in the application form. For what we're seeing for the conversion children, so those would be those that are enrolled in a provider that has preschool promise slots that are that are eligible for preschool promise, but we're currently paying privately. So that may be most likely because the provider is a new preschool promise provider, but thanks to those of you asking questions in the trainings, also would apply if there's a existing preschool promise provider that may have more spaces than they did prior. So those families would be sort of first priority to enroll into those new preschool promise spaces. What we'd be doing there is to say, as a provider's agreement is executed, that families have a way to reach out to hubs to say, I'm interested in applying for preschool promise. I'm interested in determining that I'm eligible. And then would use a preschool promise conversion application form, which is essentially the family has already indicated where they'd like to go because they're currently enrolled there, but needs to sort of go through a documented application that does that. These forms are currently in sort of final formatting, thanks to those of you who've been through some trainings and have helped us uncover some areas to fix and reformat, and then making sure that we have them available in Spanish. And as soon as we've completed formatting and got translations complete, we'll be releasing those forms, which should be fairly shortly. I wanted to talk a little bit about the preschool screening form as the conversation around service delivery and family needs came up. I think, I want to highlight for all of you in the manual, it goes into detail around some ways in which each hub may want to customize this form. I think I'd like to, be in touch with everyone about kind of releasing and the use of this form. I think it could potentially do some of what Sue was mentioning around, making sure that we're understanding what would work for families or what families would be comfortable with now. And also, I think recognizing that when we talk about, using this to select families and that families would be ranking sites, of course, we are still waiting on executed agreements to do some of that. So I think it might be a good place to continue a conversation around, what information or what of families that may be on existing waiting lists or that may be reaching out and interested in this, how could we use some of these to gauge a bit more about families' preferences, particularly in light of COVID and the uncertainties around some of the service delivery options that may or may not be available. So that's fireworks going off in my head as we were talking about that, to think about setting up a time to keep those conversations going around there. Yeah.
This is Denise. So I think this is actually a timely question, and it may be for the FAQ or Dana. The question is, when will programs be required to start services, whatever those services look like, in person versus distance versus combo, and how will the delay affect our timeline to fill the slot?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if Dana has an update or something to share there.
I'm not sure she's still on. I was looking for her on the list. Are you there, Dana? She may have popped off. So Dorothy, we'll get that. I know everyone's curious about that question, and we'll get back to you on that. Everybody.
Yeah. I think it's going to have to, in terms of our timelines, we're going to have to think about sort of how that's responsive to where we are with those delays. So I'll definitely take that back and make sure there's more to come.
Can I add one little thing? Sorry. I just was thinking about that both in terms of like our ability to fill the slots, but also when you
Dorothy, you're cutting out.
Alert family just the interplay of like
Dorothy, I just want to let you know we can't hear you. I think we'll wait for her to come into the chat box, probably Ann. Yep, she's going to follow up. Okay, very good.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'd love to follow up and talk about that. It sounded from what I could hear like a very timely and an important question.
Hey, Ann.
Yes.
Sorry, this is Bess. I don't mean to interrupt. I just want to restate my understanding of the conversion process. And so when the providers get their contracts, they'll be sort of directed or encouraged for the families that they're currently serving, these are for new providers, to reach out to the hub and get their eligibility determination. We are not sort of going to track them down via the provider. Like, I'm just trying to understand sort of like where the initial contact comes from and when and how proactive we need to be about gathering those families' information.
Yeah, I think thank you for that question. I think it's important. It's always the family's choice to apply. So even if, provider thinks they're eligible, would like them to fill that, we really want the contact to be initiated by the family when it comes to applying. So I think as we think about sort of reaching out to and like connecting and executing agreements with providers, I think maybe something in there that providers can have available to their to the families who might be interested in applying or in the Preschool Promise slots, and a way to connect the families to the hub would be kind of our first step. But yes, I don't think that we would envision providers giving hubs family information and then hubs reaching out. I think we want to make sure that it's really centered on the families and the families' choices about applying.
Great, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Perfect.
Thanks. The only other piece I wanted to raise, because it came up relatively recently, and I know there's been a lot of questions about this, for the providers that currently have intent to award. So this slide is again pretty much the same. The question has been, is there a way to see the provider applications as a way of kind of learning more about the providers? So as a reminder, the executed agreement is the green light of all of this work that still holds, but the provider applications are public. They're available on the website. The link was very unwieldy, so I want to send these out to you all as a click here in a PDF. But they are on the ELD website and can be used to help inform you all about the providers and the applications that they put forward. And then yet again, executed agreement is our green light, but as a way of getting to know who the providers and some of their service delivery and things like that, those can be a helpful resource for you all. So more to just say, we will send this slide to you directly following this, and appreciate that.
So, and there's just, and again, we may not be ready to answer this, but there's just questions about what to do about for coordinated enrollment. How do they work with the time frame with providers having 90 days to sign the contract? So if some providers are ready to go, you know, in August, September, and others aren't ready to start till December, how are they going to work that? What's going to be the plan? How do they figure it out? Is it a community conversation? What's the, I don't know if we have any information on that yet.
No, I mean, I think you know, as Miriam was saying too, we're going to need to be flexible and creative, I think, as we continue in these conversations, and start making some choices about what to do. So I don't know that we are going to have a one-size-fits-all approach there, but I want to make sure that we're talking about what's going to work best in community, because this, yeah, creates a wrinkle in, you know, a process or a timeline. So I don't know that we can say what it will look like yet, but understand, I think, the potential question there and the potential need for more there.
I think this is a question too, more for Dana and some of the work that we're doing behind the scenes, which is how much will providers know about coordinated enrollment once they have an executed agreement. My understanding is that information is part of the executed agreement, as will further communications that will come out, guiding them on what the requirements are in coordinated enrollment and placement. So if there's anything to add to that, Anne.
I think that's it. It's described both in the agreements themselves that providers will agree to working with the hubs on coordinated enrollment, and there's also sections in their grant. I think it's also called a grant manual. That will be.
Yep. So yeah, more to come. We'll share that information with all of you, of course. And then, of course, and I know the answer is yes to this, but will there be additional guidance and training on how to run the lottery process?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. More to come on that too, for sure. Mm-hmm. Okay, that clears the questions for the moment.
Okay, well, that's the end of my slides. How are we? Happy to take more questions as they come up. I'll flip back to this one. I think this is probably the most content-heavy slide. And just see if anything else is coming to mind for folks.
And do we know what the timeline is for training on the lottery? This is sorry.
No, not an exact date, no.
Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, somebody wanted to jump in.
Yeah, this is Christy. I was wondering if there's been any more discussion on collecting electronic signatures, electronic document storage, converting forms to electronic fillable forms, and what platforms will be acceptable, kind of that side of things, so we can go contactless as much as possible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think what we are seeing and trying to make the space for is sort of hubs having resources available, you know, like sort of different potential solutions, and that our main concern is, of course, that we are meeting requirements on FERPA on data security and secure transfer and parental consent there. And so I think in the manual, it may say something around ELD approval. I think what we're looking at is that that mostly that we're concerned with meeting the requirements of FERPA around security, and that as you have thoughts, solutions, things that you'd like to do, that we're happy to talk about those individually to see if they meet our needs, and happy to approve if they do.
Okay, I need to set that up ASAP, so that I just found out I have something completely free to me through the college that I know is FERPA compliant because they use it at the college, and it meets DoD standards. So want to get that approved ASAP.
Okay,
So
yep, I saw that that email come in. Let's do that. Let's talk about it. Okay. Any other things coming up?
Hang on, I'm peeking here. Okay, let's see. Begonia, can you, I must have missed something here. Can you go ahead and talk about your question?
It seems that there's going to be a discussion with Miriam Calderon and the Oregon Latinx Leadership Network, and it seems that it's a closed group, so somebody has to let you in. So I believe it's Anthony, but I might be wrong. So is this for a specific group of people, or can it be extended to some of us as well?
I don't think I know anything about that one.
No, I'm missing the pre part of where that came from.
It is in your website.
I'm sorry, what?
On the news section of the Early Learning Division
website. I would have to take this question and pass it on Begonia and get back to you. Okay, then there's a question, Anne, about is the application in a fillable PDF format?
Yes, it is.
Great. And then are the forms going to be in other languages beyond Spanish?
No. I guess the screening form, as a customizable form, I think we had one of our trainings had a great conversation about like sharing resources for other languages and translation interpretation. And I think that might be a good place to think about reaching other languages or sharing and discussing resources to do that. The application form will only be English and Spanish.
And this is Bess. I had another question. In previous years, there was a 2-week, sort of a mandated 2-week contact time. We had to let families know within 2 weeks if they were deemed eligible. And I'm just wondering if there's any kind of those timelines instituted with this process.
Not explicitly. I think maybe the assumption behind that has kind of been that in the conversation with family, be it on the phone or in person, that that would be able to be done. Family is eligible or ineligible as the part of that interview or conversation. But we haven't. I don't think we had anticipated a turnaround time specific to that. So I can check in and make sure we can clarify that where we might need to.
And do you have a recommendation for how long we should wait to collect documents that are missing before we move on to another family?
Yeah, I think I think that I'm trying to think. I mean, my experiences are all in other places, so I don't want to speak out of an Oregon context. But I think there's some reasonable amount of time in which if a family is either not gathering documents. Again, for most documentation, if families do not have it available to them, there are self-declarations that can be completed to meet those requirements. But if a family is unwilling or unresponsive to complete a certification, I'll take that back and see if we can put something in around sort of a reasonable amount of time in which to receive those. Otherwise, to let the family know that you're moving to the next family. Thanks for that.
Yeah, that would be super helpful just to have in writing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Anybody else? Doesn't look like there's any other questions at this point, Anne.
Okay, well, as always, keep reaching out. Let's talk individually. I'm sure some more of you in the trainings that are going the rest of this week. Otherwise, yeah, as things come up, questions, I'm happy to respond to them individually or bring groups together as need be.
Hey, sorry, it's Bess again. One last question squeezed in at the end. Do you know when we're going to get our coordinated enrollment contracts? Do we have a date for that, or ETA?
They are in final review and have been a little bit. So I don't have an exact date, but I know they're on the last step.
Okay,
so,
cool.
Sorry
Thanks.
for the lack of yeah.
Understood.
All right.
Thanks, you guys.
I think with that, thank you, Beth. Well, thanks, everybody. It was great to talk with all of you today. Very fruitful 90 minutes here. So have a good rest of your day. We'll be in contact. I got your question, Begonia. I'll get that moved forward. And also capture the questions for Dana as well. So we'll get the recording out to you here in the next 48 hours. It takes a little while to convert it. And look forward to talking to you again all soon. So thank you.
Thank you.
Bye. Take care. Bye.
Thanks, Sue.